The House of David has absolutely taken the world, it feels like, by storm. It is ranking in the top listing of shows for Amazon Prime. And it's gotten, well, Christians of all kinds of types and backgrounds in a little bit of a debate. Should we watch the show? Should we not watch the show? Is it biblically, theologically, historically accurate? Is it not? And if you haven't already watched my first episode covering episodes 1 and 2, I definitely want you to check that out. I've linked to it right over there. But in this episode, we're going to talk about episodes 3 and 4 of the House of David. And the goal here is to help us determine what is fact, what is speculative, and what's fictitious. And so today, in the next little time together we have together, we're going to try to figure out what's speculative and what is fiction. And in these episodes, we've got a good bit of both, honestly. I do want to just say this. I have personally enjoyed watching the House of David. One of the comments I got in a Substack article that I wrote was actually a little bit kind of aggressive. You know, it was like, well, why is anybody even watching this? Like Hollywood is trying to take, the biblical narrative and spin it and to turn it around. And to that, I would just say, I don't know anybody personally on the show. I have interacted just a little bit with one of the producers of the show on Instagram. And let me just say, seems to be a person who generally loves the Lord and wants to communicate the beauty of the biblical narrative in a way that is winsome and appealing to the world. And I think there's freedom in order to do it in such a way. And as we're going to see today, there is actually some intentionality of where they have to go into speculation and fiction, that it's being done through actually some pretty amazing theological and scholarly endeavors. And so I'm going to unpack some of that right now. And so once again, if the goal was for this to be 100% literalistic to the scriptures, then of course you're going to be frustrated, but that's not the goal. I don't think that's the goal. For me, it seems like it is to put on display the biblical narrative, the storyline, and to enter into the ethos, into the emotion of what's actually taking place in the House of David in such a way that we can try to begin to fill in some gaps. And once again, listen, if you want like what actually happened, just go to your Bible and read the stories and be just encouraged by that. Okay, I want to start with just this one little line that happens in episode 3 from Jonathan. And this idea, Jonathan just asked, like, would I have been a good king? And this line in the show has really stuck with me. And I think one of the things that I've loved about the show is to really put on display the heroic humility of Jonathan. We're starting to see his character develop. We're starting to see his love for his father and for his family, but ultimately his greater love for Yahweh. And we're also seeing why David and Jonathan are knit together at the soul level, because you see this deep level of trust and understanding of Jonathan. And here's my speculation as a theologian. I think Jonathan would have been a fantastic king. I think he would have been a heroic king. I think he would have been the perfect king in order to deal with the chaos of his father, Saul. And yet, isn't it so true that just because we could be the perfect fit for something, that we still have to submit that thing to the Lord and allow the Lord to rise up the right people in the right places, and to just know that at the end, it's for our ultimate good. And so even with Jonathan saying that, I think that's evidence that he would have been a fantastic king. And yet there is intended, I believe, to be a deep sense of sorrow that Jonathan is not able to live out almost what he was born to do because of the sin and the failure of his father. And that's just deep on so many levels. And we don't have the time to get into all of that, but it might resonate with you. And so I just wanted to address that and acknowledge it. Okay. We get into this whole thing about the Witch of Endor. And so we get into this interesting moment in the show where you really have Saul's wife. We're going to do a whole different episode on the speculation on Saul's wife. Hey, Humble Theology fam, I'm so excited to share with you my first solo Bible study, Finding Peace Through Humility, a Bible study through the book of Judges. Now, the whole idea of the book of Judges is that the people of God are spiraling kind of out of control. And the question we have is it possible for them to actually come out of the spiral? And it is. And kind of what I present throughout this Bible study is that the thing that's hiding in plain sight, that God is just consistently trying to draw the people of Israel back then and his people today to, is the ancient virtue of humility. the gift of humility is the gift of self-awareness, so that we can know who God is, we can know who we are, and so that we are powerfully equipped to know other people. And so I'm really excited about this Bible study. There are video lessons that go with it, and of course this Bible study guide as well. You can get Finding Peace Through Humility on Amazon, wherever Bible studies are sold, and then I'll also put a link for it as well in the show notes. Blessings to you, friends. You've got Saul's wife, who kind of steps in to really deal with the chaos of what's happening as Saul is debilitated by these dreams and these hallucinations and these things that have been plaguing him. And Saul's wife kind of steps in and begins to have these conversations with different people inside of her household. And basically her decision is to essentially to turn to the witch of Endor, to various mediums, and that whole idea. And so I think I want to start here with Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12. I want to start with what God specifically tells the people of Israel, which is the carried on tradition that Saul absolutely knew, that his wife absolutely knew, and that Jonathan absolutely knows, which is why Jonathan in that scene kind of gets frustrated with his mom. Like, what are you doing? Like, don't you know, like, our household, we follow Yahweh. And then the mom kind of looks like at Jonathan's like, yeah, but don't you ever forget that I'm still the wife of the king, you know? And like, you're going to basically step in line. And it was just an interesting kind of dynamic that happened in that scene. But this is what Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12 says. To the people of Israel as they're about to enter into the promised land, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not imitate the detestable customs of these nations. No one among you is to sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire, right? This is Molech. Practice divination, tell fortunes, interpret omens, practice sorcery, cast out spells, consult a medium or a spiritist, or inquire of the dead. Everyone who does these acts is detestable to the Lord. The Lord your God is driving out the nations before you because of these detestable acts, right? Now, here's what's a really interesting detail about the Old Testament. Nowhere in the Old Testament will you find that God condemns necromancy or seeking out witches and mediums on the ground that it's futile. Right? So nowhere do you find that the reason why God's saying, hey, don't do these things is because he's like, oh, they're not going to work anyways. Like, of course, that's dumb. Like, don't go to them. They're not going to work. That's not the grounds on which God tells him not to do it. But he does it because he says, hey, this is counterfeit. This is a rebellion against God, on whom alone, God alone, should all of Israel believe in and depend on. I mean, we can look at Leviticus 19:31, Leviticus 26, and then also 20, verse 27. And then what we just read, Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 14, the Lord himself rises up his people, his prophets, his spokesmen to speak his words to his people. We don't need counterfeits. And so once again, I think one of the things that's important is when we miss the cosmic reality, the supernatural reality of the scriptures, we can diminish this type of stuff as of saying, oh, that's child's play. Like, of course that doesn't work. But God doesn't condemn it because it doesn't work. God condemns it because you can tap into actual dark forces. God condemns it because you can actually talk to evil spirits and they will actually lead you away from God. They will actually lead you to self-destruction while the whole time feeding you things that you think is going to be so fruitful for your life. But in the end, it's actually just ultimately destructive for you. And so when Saul's wife actually goes and she begins this narrative structure where we're going to get to the episodes later, but basically inquiring of the witch of Endor, I think this is some background information that you need to just have that might be helpful for you. So Endor was a town on the north side of the hill of Moreh, south of Mount Tabor. And this was the land that was roughly associated and assigned to the tribe of Manasseh. Now, this site was actually the ancient site that actually has several ancient caves, and the poetic tradition, the story that's kind of told about this location, it actually preserves it as the place where Barrack's victory took place, right? And so all these caves, like, and you can look at Psalm 83:10, that kind of refers to this. And this is also in the vicinity of the town, which is where it gets its name, of Endor, where the witch gets her name. And this is in 1 Samuel 28:7. Now, in the actual storyline. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to like when the encounter actually happens. Hopefully this will help you when you kind of get to that in the actual episode. The Witch of Endor is described, the Hebrew phrase is Ba'alath Ov. And this is like, how do we describe this? We could translate this as a familiar, the mistress of a familiar spirit, right? So the mistress of a familiar spirit idea connects to the Hebrew word ov, which could also be translated as ghost in English. That's kind of where we get the idea of ghost from. And the familiar idea of it is that it's a known entity. It's a known spiritual being. In the ancient Near Eastern world, it was understood that your family, when they deceased, they became spirits, and in the spirit realm, they would go down into the underworld. And so there's this kind of familiarity, but then there's also malevolent evil spirits that could pose as your ancestors, and they would come back and they would actually try to lead you astray. And so what's probably happening is that the Witch of Endor is actually connecting with real spirits. Again, the issue isn't the futility of it, it's the fact that it's actually happening. And so when Saul is desperate, later on, we're going to get to this, I'm jumping ahead, but when Saul is desperate in order to get some help, the way that the House of David does it is it actually presents the wife as the means by which this kind of all takes place. But essentially, Saul was the one originally who bans all of this in Israel, who says, hey, we got to follow the law of Moses. We can't be doing any of this stuff. And so the leftovers of this, the witches and the priestesses, there's a mention of the priestess of Baal, like they are kind of hiding, right? And Saul's wife is like, hey, they might be out there. And if God is going to stop talking to us, we can go to the counterfeit and maybe get some help over here. So we're left wondering, like, who is the Witch of Endor? And some of you might have been surprised that there's the suggestion that the Witch of Endor is connected to or related to Abner, the general of Saul. So in English, we'll probably just say Abner. The B can be like the V sound in Hebrew. So I might say Avner, but it's just Abner. And so the general is, connected in the show. And some of you are like, wait a minute, that's wild. Is this like totally fiction? So this is where educated speculation comes into play. So the biblical account doesn't give us a genealogy or a heritage of this woman. She's just anonymous. She's just the Witch of Endor, this mistress of a familiar spirit. However, once we get into the rabbinic tradition actually suggests that, and this is in the rabbinical midrash, says that this woman, her name was Zephaniah, and she was the mother of Avner, right? So that's where the House of David is getting this idea when Saul's wife is like, Avner, what about your mom? And he's like, you don't want anything to do with that. Like, that's a bad idea. Well, this is where that tradition is coming from. Well, who is Avner? Avner is the cousin of King Saul, and he's also the commander of Saul's army. We find this in 1 Samuel 14, verses 50 through 51. Pay attention to the relationship with Avner and Joab, who's also around at the time. Things get pretty wild there. When it comes to this familiar spirit, this Ov that is mentioned that the Witch of Endor seeks out, the expression presents itself in the Old Testament 16 to 18 times. It's the translation of the Hebrew word Ov. And the term is related actually to similar words that are Sumerian, Hittite, Akkadian, and Ugaritic that probably all come from the same source. Now, originally it meant a ritual hole or a pit that was dug into the ground to give underworld spirits access to the practitioner for a short period of time. Hey, Humble Theology fam. It's kind of wild, but I wrote my very first book and it released earlier this year. It's called The Hidden Peace. Here it is right here. Finding true security, strength, and confidence through humility. Really what I wanted to do was write a book that was accessible for the everyday average Bible reader, but gave you some sound biblical theology on the ancient virtue of humility, which was in fact fact, the very virtue that sustained and helped the first century church to thrive and flourish. And this was all based around Philippians 2, 8, and 9, the idea that Jesus himself really exampled for us and modeled for us divine humility. And so the book is available right now. If you've ever felt anxious, if you are worried about what other people feel or look about you, I mean, if you've had any type of insecurities really at all in your life and it has robbed you of peace, the secret to the peace that you've been longing for is this ancient virtue that has for far too long been neglected, the virtue of humility. The Hidden Peace is available on Amazon and all the major book retailers where you would normally get it. You can also get a copy from Proverbs 31 Ministries, the P31 bookstore, which is where I serve as director of theology. And I'll have a link in the show notes for you as well. I pray that this book would be an encouragement for you as you grow and you learn how to cultivate the soil of humility, which is in fact the soil in which all the fruit of the Spirit of Galatians 5 flow from. Blessings to you, friends. So in other words, again, think cosmic geography, that it is the digging into the ground to give access to these spirits to kind of come up through a portal, basically through a hole. And so the practice of necromancy in the ancient Near East, it's actually reflected in different literature. One of them is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Let me read to you one of the lines. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it says, "Forthright he opened a hole in the earth. The spirit of Enkidu, like a wind puff, issued forth from the netherworlder underneath," right? Now, there's also a verse in Isaiah that kind of speaks to this. This is Isaiah 29:4. "Your voice shall come from the ground like the voice of a ghost." Ov, that's the Hebrew word, ov. "And your speech shall whisper out of the dust." So you're getting that idea of the ground, of a pit, of a hole that's being dug, and of a spirit's voice that is coming up and out of that. So at a different time, we're going to talk more about the Witch of Endor, but this is kind of that theological background that will help you understand like what's actually happening and where are they getting this idea. Okay. Then towards the end of the episode, you're introduced to the mother of the giants. This is wild. And the mother of the giants has a name, and she says her name is Orpah, right? Some of you biblical theology nerds, you're like, wait a minute. We've heard that name Orpah before, but it's not with the David story. What is actually happening here? So, Orpah in the biblical narrative is the Moabitess daughter-in-law of Naomi. Right? Naomi was the wife of, Naomi was the wife of Elimelech, but Orpah was the daughter-in-law of Naomi and the wife of Mahlon, which is one of Ruth's or Naomi's sons. So after the death of her husband, Mahlon, Orpah and her sister-in-law, Ruth, wanted to go back to Naomi's hometown. However, Naomi's like, hey, I don't think you should do this. Naomi returns to her people and to her gods. This is Ruth 1:4, right? We know that Ruth herself chooses to go with Naomi back to the hometown. Now, we lose kind of all contact with Orpah. What happens to her? What's the tradition, right? So this is once again where the House of David actually pulls on rabbinic literature to try to figure out what's actually happening. So in rabbinic literature, this is wild, you guys. In rabbinical literature, Orpah is identified with Harapha, who is the mother of the 4 Philistine giants. So this is comes out in 2 Samuel 21, 22. This is what 2 Samuel 21, 20-22 says. At Gath, there was still another battle. A huge man was there with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was descended from the giants. This is the Nephilim. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David's brother Shammai, killed him. These 4 were descended from the giant in Gath and were killed by David and his soldiers, right? And so the rabbinical literature actually identifies Orpah as the mother of these 4 giants. And these 4 sons were said to have been given to her. This is kind of the storyline, right? The poetic storyline. These 4 sons were given to her for the 4 tears which she shed while she was parting her mother-in-law Naomi. Now, fascinating kind of detail again, rabbinical literature. She was the sister of Ruth. Supposedly, she was the sister of Ruth, and both were daughters of the Moabite king Eglon. Now, think about this. If this is true, then you have Ruth's seed, her descendant, the great King David, but then you have Orpah, and you've got her descendants, these Nephilim giants. and they come into battle against each other. David basically battles his cousins, and it's, the righteous line versus the unholy seed, the unholy line. So you've got the righteous seed and you've got the unholy seed, and they basically go at it, and it's the righteous seed that is victorious over it. And so that's kind of where we get this whole idea, or at least House of David, I believe, gets their idea of the descended lineage of Orpah and these giants that came from her. So this was a review of episodes 3 and 4. I will once again try to unpack in much more depth from a theology standpoint on Substack. And so you can go ahead. I'll put the link in the captions for the Substack articles. I've already written 4 articles as of this time that really unpack, the cosmic geography idea. It unpacks the whole concept of the giants and how tall Goliath was. You might be frustrated about my conclusion of how tall Goliath was. And then I also have an article that is on the name of God, or Hashem. And in fact, the next video that I do for you guys is on that concept by itself, is just why is it that in the House of David, they refer to God every now and then as Hashem. And we'll get into that. Anyways, I hope this was helpful for you. Hey, if you've enjoyed this, do me a massive favor. Would you hit the subscribe button on YouTube? If you're listening to this on the Theology Talk podcast, would you hit the follow button on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify? And then honestly, give this a share to your friends. And I'd love for you to join me over on Substack as well, because I've got some more in-depth articles that have footnotes, and I get to be a little bit more nerdy and academic in that space. And I think that you might enjoy that as well. All right, keep watching House of David. Hey, in the comments, let me know what you think. Let me know other questions that you have, because that will help me to produce more content and to get some more videos out your way that will help you kind of like, having coffee with a theologian, talking through nerdy theology stuff on the House of David. See you guys later. Bye.